to all, and greetings from Paris in France, where a beautiful spring has started. My name is Sujin Kim. I'm the acting head of the division at the OECD, which is in charge of cities, urban policies, and sustainable development within the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. I will have the pleasure to serve as your moderator for today's event, during which we will launch a brand new report of the OECD entitled Decarbonizing Buildings in Cities and Regions, a topic, of course, that is more timely than ever as the world is still battling to cut down carbon emissions in a context of rising energy prices. And so we will see today together how climate policies, energy policies, and urban policies need to meet and really work together to achieve this common objective of more sustainable urban development. So we will organize our time today in 3 moments. First, to set the scene, we will hear some opening remarks from 3 people. So our director at the OECD, then 2 high-level representatives from 2 partner countries who made this project possible, so from Japan and the Netherlands. Second, we will hear an overview of the key findings of the report by the lead author of the report, who is here with us. And third, we are lucky to have with us a very diversified lineup of distinguished experts and panelists that I will, of course, introduce more in detail before their intervention. But they will share their perspectives on the topic of decarbonization of buildings in cities and regions from different angles. And we hope to have some time to engage in a discussion with our audience. We have about 250 registered participants from all over the world today. And I would like to thank everyone for joining. So before we begin, just a quick word of housekeeping. You are probably very familiar with this by now, but today's webinar is being recorded. We will make the recording available on our website over the next few days. So please do not hesitate to spread the word and encourage your networks to view it later on. In terms of language, we will stick to English today. Unfortunately, we will have no interpretation. And during the event, if you are experiencing any technical difficulty, please use the chat function below to contact our support team. And please use the Q&A function if you would like to share your comments, ask questions to our panelists, because we are in a Zoom webinar format, which means that only panelists can take the floor directly, but we would also like to hear from you and your questions in the Q&A function down below. So with this, to set the scene, we will now move on to the opening remarks, and I will invite the first speaker of our 3 opening remarks. It is really my pleasure to welcome Ms. Lamia Kamalshawi, Director of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities, to share a few words. Lamia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sujin, Director Imamura, dear Mr. Dyke Kerhouse, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today as we launch this new OECD report, Decarbonizing Buildings in Cities and Regions, and I'm going to try to show it to you. Hopefully you can see it, and you can download it on the website. And actually, this report comes at a critical moment, of course, as Sujin mentioned. The war in Ukraine is driving energy prices up all around the world. Gas spot prices in Europe are now more than 10 times higher than a year ago, and the cost of oil has nearly doubled over the same period. This is, of course, increasing the pressure on households and raising the prospect of fuel poverty for many. Improvement to our buildings can help address this challenge, saving household money as well as saving our planet by reducing our carbon footprint to help us tackle climate change. This report is part of the long-standing work of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities on fostering resilient, green, and low-carbon cities. It forms part of the program of work of the Regional Development Policy Committee of the OECD and its Working Party on Urban Policy. So I would like to thank warmly the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism of Japan, and the Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations of the Netherlands for supporting this project. And my thanks also go to the European Committee of the Regions for their cooperation in developing and disseminating our joint global survey on decarbonizing buildings. So, ladies and gentlemen, our buildings require urgent action. Buildings and constructions account for 40% of global CO2 emission, 40%. But these percentages can reach up to 70% in large cities like Paris, London, New York, or Tokyo. And actually, about 60% of emission that could be cut by 2015 using technically feasible and widely available measures come from the building sector. The decarbonization of building is not just a climate issue, which is already an important rationale to take action, but it is also an economic and social one. Investment in energy efficiency in buildings generates multiple co-benefits, such as job creation, better health outcomes, and more affordable energy. The current global environments provide now renewed momentum for actions at all levels of governments to decarbonize buildings. For instance, at the supranational level, the European Commission Renovation Wave aims to double annual energy renovation rates by 2030, with the objective of renovating 35 million building units and creating 160,000 jobs by then, which is a lot. Many national governments are putting major recovery packages on the table, devoting a substantial part to energy efficiency renovations. I give you an example. Korea's Green New Deal of July 2020 promised renovation of public rental housing and schools to make them net zero emissions. And of course, there are many other examples in many countries. And at the local level, many cities are including measures to enhance energy efficiency, retrofits, and renewable energy use in their recovery strategy from COVID-19. And this is the case, for instance, in cities like Lille in France, Copenhagen in Denmark, and Seoul in Korea. But this is great. We have collected a lot of evidence, but of course, more can be done. And money, by the way, is not the only tool available in the toolbox. Indeed, cities and regions, they have important levers that can support the decarbonization of buildings. First, cities and regions, they own a number of public buildings themselves and can lead by example. For instance, in Japan, local and regional authorities own about 30% of all non-residential building stock. Second, cities and regions, they have a unique knowledge of the local building stock, which make them well placed to tailor their strategy to make buildings the most energy efficient possible. Third, local and regional governments are in a unique position to mobilize local construction firms, energy companies, local businesses and citizens in a collective effort to decarbonize buildings. And finally, many cities and regions in many countries, they're responsible actually for building and zoning regulations, and they can develop ambitious regulation to spur decarbonization. So local and regional leadership can therefore make a difference, but they have also to work in tandem with national governments. And by the way, national government should provide the right incentive, the right framework. And this is really essential to overcome gaps in funding, as well as gaps between ministerial portfolio. For example, the Netherlands provides funding for pilot areas for districts free of natural gas and promotes knowledge sharing between municipalities within the country. And this program will help 1.5 million homes transition from gas to low carbon heating by 2030. In Japan, three ministries, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and the Ministry of the Environment, so actually three very, very important big ministries, they have developed together a roadmap of policies to promote decarbonization of in housing and buildings from energy efficiency, renewable energy use, and carbon storage, with clear roles for relevant ministries. So the checklist provided in the report outlined key action for national, regional, and local government to work together to decarbonize buildings. So ladies and gentlemen, the OECD has long been working on national policies to promote the energy and environmental performance of buildings. So this report that we are launching today is the first time that we have built solid evidence to demonstrate the potential of cities and regions for advancing the decarbonization of buildings. So I'm really confident that the recommendation from this report can and will help strengthen and scale up decarbonization policies at all levels of government. My final word, please allow me to thank in particular Atsuhito Oshima, who has been coordinating the report. He's going to present now the key findings of the report in a moment. And I want to tell him thank you so much, not just for the report, but for his stay at the OECD, because actually this is his last day at the OECD. So we are extremely grateful for all the work that he has been doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lamia. I think you gave us a very clear reminder of the rationale and the urgency for advancing actions to decarbonize buildings and why it is so important to do it at the subnational level in cities and regions where these buildings are accounting for such a great share of emissions. Thank you again, Lamia. So for the rest of our opening remarks, I will now turn to two countries that have been playing a very pioneering role in this respect. So first, Japan. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Takashi Imamura, who is Director for Building Policy Development in the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism in Japan. Mr. Imamura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, good. My name is Takashi Imamura. I'm in charge of energy efficiency code in Japan. And first of all, I would like to highly commend our colleague at OECD Secretariat to launch this very important report at this time. And I would like to thank you for allowing me to make some remarks today. I also want to thank you for setting up this meeting at this time, because I don't have to worry about the last train this time. Anyway, I think I can have up to 5 minutes to briefly explain about the Japanese situation regarding the perspective on how to scale up the decarbonization in buildings. And first of all, I would like to share with you the Japan's basic policy or roadmap, which the Lamia-san has just explained, thankfully, and which was the result of the collaboration of 3 Japanese ministries, including our Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport. Anyway, Japan's basic roadmap to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050, we have this image. Regarding the energy efficiency, we will aim at securing the level of net zero energy on stock average by 2050, stock average. And regarding the renewable energy, we will aim at introducing renewable energy in common houses and buildings, as long as such introduction is reasonable by 2050. So keeping such goals in mind, by 2030, we will mandate the level of net zero energy for all the newly constructed houses and buildings by revising the current Energy Efficiency Act. And for renewable energy, solar panels should be introduced on top of roofs of 60% of newly constructed detached houses by 2030. That's our main goal. So secondly, I would like to touch on the regulatory measures that we are planning. In the very near future, we are going to strengthen the Japanese Building Energy Efficiency Act. We are preparing right now. We will mandate compliance with the energy efficiency standards for all the newly constructed buildings, including residential buildings, by the year 2025. Then we will gradually upgrade the energy efficiency standards to the level of net zero energy by the year 2030 at the latest. We will also strengthen the display system for the energy saving performance for residential and non-residential buildings when they are sold or leased. On the other hand, as everybody says, retrofitting of existing building is very challenging. So the retrofitting should be promoted by all possible support measures, such as subsidies, taxation, and low interest loans, by all kinds of measures possible. Thirdly, regarding the initiative led by cities and regions, local governments should implement thorough energy saving measures through building permission process. Local government should also expand the introduction of renewable energy in public houses or public buildings as much as possible, because they should be a role model. And finally, I think it's really necessary to change awareness and behaviors of citizens. We need to inform the public of the necessity of energy saving measures so that each citizen will take action as their own issue, not as something that someone else will do. I believe local government can play and should play a very important role in such efforts. In disseminating such information, it may be quite effective to use a method of behavioral economics, shall I say, or so-called nudge techniques. And it is a policy to help people select the best choice by themselves, not by regulation or by financing. For example, 1 year ago in Japan, we have introduced a system to oblige architects to explain to building owners whether their houses comply with energy standards. And if not, how much energy costs may be reduced if they upgrade the envelope installations. As a result, about 25% building owners decided to comply with the new energy standards voluntarily. So I feel such nudge techniques work pretty well in Japan, as Japanese people in general are good at listening to other people's opinion. Anyway, I believe such nudging is also the important role of local government too. Okay, finally, on behalf of the Japanese government, I would like to comment that it will be our pleasure to continue supporting this program at OECD. And again, I would like to congratulate on the launch of this very important report this time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Imamura, for those opening remarks. I think it's been fascinating to hear how Japan has taken these very ambitious, both legislative and regulatory measures. And also, it's very interesting to hear from you this use of, both the stick and the carrot in a way, so that you also encourage and nudge, as you said, this buy-in from the public and from the general population, more broadly speaking. So this is a very important point that we are keeping with us, also taking it to the panel discussion, hopefully later. Thank you again, Mr. Imamura. I will now turn to our third speaker in the opening remarks. Another country that has been taking a very active and leading role in the decarbonization of buildings in cities and regions. So it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Robert Dijksterhuis, Envoy for Sustainable Building from the Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations in the Netherlands. Robert, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Sujin. And thank you also for the opportunity to share some Dutch perspective on the energy efficiency in cities and regions. So first of all, 2 weeks ago, our minister launched a national housing and construction agenda in the Netherlands, in which he lays out a policy for the coming years. And for this entire agenda, but certainly when it comes to decarbonization of the built environment, our minister sees that it is vital to closely work together with municipalities and regions. And let me explain that briefly. So currently in the Netherlands, we have approximately 8 million homes and some 600,000 million other buildings. And the vast majority of these buildings will still be there in 2050. After all, if you look at the entire life cycle of a building, then it's often better from the point of view of greenhouse gas emissions to renovate the building than to demolish it and replace it with a new building. In other words, millions of buildings will have to be renovated. And this means installing insulation to improve energy efficiency and replacing heating installations with systems without fossil emissions. And you must know that in the Netherlands, currently about 90% of all our homes are being heated by an individual heating system based on natural gas. And by 2050, these must all be replaced by a renewable alternative. And that will, of course, be done one building at a time. But given the scale of the required operation, it's also necessary to do it a neighborhood or a district at a time. And that is why our minister launched its 5-track plan in which cities and regions play a pivotal role. First of all, it is for consumers and for people living in houses important to know where in the future which heat solution will be offered. It's not efficient to offer an all-electric solution and a heat network based on geothermal or aquathermal heat and green gas all in one street. So therefore, we have asked municipalities in the Netherlands to indicate per district via a heat transition vision what the future heat supply will look like. And we believe that the district approach will be very important to achieve this goal. And Sujin mentioned it already in her introduction. Oh, sorry, Lamia Kamal mentioned it. And this is not something to be done by the national government, of course. That is where municipalities are far better equipped to do that task. At the same time, there will be a very clear action perspective for residents and building owners themselves to make their individual homes more sustainable, with standards and norms for situations where otherwise insufficient space is made. Yes, we can nudge them, as Takashi Imamura said, but at the same time, we also have to subsidize and set norms on occasion. And we pay much attention to replacing the central heating boilers with heat pumps in the Netherlands and to subsidize home insulation. And here as well, we look in our interventions at a combination of national and municipal support schemes. A third track is making non-residential buildings more sustainable. So in 2012, we announced that offices must have at least an energy label C, which is somewhere in the middle of fully energy neutral and very bad. So they need to be energy label C from the 1st of January next year, 2023, in order to be used as offices. So that will come into effect next year. And here too, municipalities play a very large role, for instance, in enforcement. So they can fine a building owner when they did not renovate enough, or ultimately even forbid offices to be rented out if they fail to meet the standards. In addition, we also pay attention to accelerating the sustainability of social real estate. And that was also said already by Ms. Kamal Sawi, that municipalities play a big role there as well, because they are the owners of much of this social real estate. It's like school buildings, sports facilities, fire stations, etc. So there we need to work together as well. The fourth track focuses on switching off the natural gas system. So in the Netherlands, everybody has their own natural gas connection, but that has to switch to something else. And there, of course, we need a stable investment climate and to create the necessary preconditions to introduce sustainable alternatives, such as green gas, geothermal energy, aquathermal energy, residual heat, and the construction of heat networks. And this is something where the national government has to work closely together with regions, cities, as well as with the private sector. And finally, we have to contend with major labor market shortages in the Netherlands in the construction sector. So we don't really only need additional training, but also innovation, industrialization, and digitization of the construction industry in order to increase labor productivity. Otherwise, it will not be possible to double or triple the renovation rate, and that is the speed required in order to reach the goals for 2030 and ultimately 2050 when we want to be carbon neutral. And all this must be sustainable, in other words, clean, emission-free, circular, climate adaptive, and nature inclusive. So to conclude, we face an enormous challenge in the Netherlands, but I think worldwide. And that requires cooperation on all levels and between all sectors. So I'm very much looking forward to the report by the OECD in this new report, because, well, we need all the help and insights we can get. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think it's also very interesting to see this 5-track effort that you describe. It really shows also the magnitude of the task, where both this national arm and also this local and regional arm really have to work in concert and to tackle not only, of course, new construction, as you said, but also the huge stock of existing buildings moving forward. So this is, I think, a very, inspiring experience that we are taking. And this is also a perfect transition to now the presentation of our report that you also referred to, because we just now heard from 2 countries, Japan and the Netherlands, but the OECD report is also based on a survey of more than 20 cities and regions. And so we are now very curious to hear about the results that we will hear from Atsuhito Oshima, who was until today a senior policy analyst in the OECD, CT's Urban Policies and Sustainable Development Division, and who is the main author of the report. So Atsuhito, you will walk us through the main findings of the report. Thank you.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Thank you all for joining this launch event. This report is based on an online survey of global cities and regions, and also a 2-year policy dialogue with government officials and key stakeholders. So I would like to thank Minister of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism of Japan, and also Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations of the Netherlands, and also European Committee of Regions who supported our survey. Let me present this report, including background, key findings, and recommendations. Next slide, please. So first, why actions are needed to decarbonize buildings? Decarbonizing buildings means to reduce energy consumption through insulation and high-performance equipment, while meeting energy demands with renewable sources as much as possible. There are 2 reasons why action is needed. First, building decarbonization can help us avoid environmental cost. In addition to reducing carbon emissions and avoid reduce energy consumptions, it also decreases air pollution from fossil fuel heatings. Second, it also produces co-benefits. Decarbonizing buildings contributes to better health, affordable energy, and job creation. In particular, the war in Ukraine is driving up energy prices. So, and even before the crisis, 20% of low-income households announced difficulty in heating their homes in OECD countries. So now is the time to act to invest in buildings. Next slide, please. In particular, renovations are the key to building decarbonization. First, due to poor insulation and inefficient heating equipment, old buildings consume much more energy than new buildings. For example, heat loss is 5 times larger in buildings built before 1945 than the buildings built after 2010. Second, these old buildings account for a large portion of existing building stock. For example, in the EU, 65% of existing buildings were built before 1980, when many countries introduced energy efficiency measures for buildings. Third, new construction alone cannot transform the building stock. Annual construction accounts for only 1% in OECD countries. Next slide, please. So as Lamia mentioned, cities and regions matter for the transitions. It's because cities and regions own an important share of public buildings. They are familiar with local building stock and close to citizens and local businesses. And they are also responsible for building and zoning regulations. These are why cities and regions have huge potential to decarbonize buildings and offer place-based responses. Next slide, please. So there are 4 key findings from the report that I would like to present today. First, ambitious policy measures. Second, local plans and strategies. Third, key barriers at the local scale. And fourth, the need for national government support. Next slide, please. So first key findings, cities and regions are taking ambitious policy measures at the subnational level, which can be scaled up. So overall, 61% of cities and regions surveyed require high energy efficiency than the national level. And 27% even call for a net zero energy level for their public buildings. Similarly, for building energy codes, 88% of the cities and regions require higher level than national level. And they demand buildings to be net zero in 25% of cities and regions. However, there is room to increase the enforcement of mandatory energy codes and develop effective regulations for existing buildings beyond the 65% of cities and regions surveyed who already applied building energy codes to existing buildings. Next slide, please. Second findings, most cities and regions surveyed have their own plans and strategies that face challenges in implementing them. So 86% of cities and regions surveyed have their own local or regional plans and strategies on energy efficiency in buildings. And encouragingly, most of them, 80%, have both quantitative targets and monitoring indicators in their plans. However, there are some challenges, especially in implementing these strategies. First one is cities and regions need to overcome ministerial silos and institutional fragmentations, especially if we look at the ministerial oversight. For example, 30% of cities and regions face oversight by more than 2 ministries. So there need to be a better coordination mechanism, not only across the levels of government, but also across ministries. The second challenge is to improve effectiveness of monitoring and evaluation. Although 82% have their monitoring indicators, most of them are output-based, like the housing units, which was renovated by the special program, which was supported by the cities and regions. So it is better to develop outcome-based indicators, which can evaluate their policy progress against their overall target in their plans and strategies. Next slide, please. The third findings is that cities and regions also experience major funding and capacity gaps, especially looking at first one is inadequate government budget and human resources, which includes insufficient budget, which limits expansion of existing local programs, and need to expand human resources and technical expertise to ensure smooth implementation of local programs, which leads to lack of incentives for property owners' commitment And there are another obstacles at local scale, which is lack of resources in local businesses. One of them is labor shortage and lack of skilled workforce. And the second point is that SMEs are key building owners, but they need to access to information and financing to invest in energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So that's why collaboration across levels of government is fundamental for overcoming obstacles. We ask cities and regions how they think, whether they think they receive enough support from national governments, and 74% of cities and regions think they do not receive enough support from national government. And they, especially the need from the national government is on financial support of especially pilot programs of local governments and awareness raising in the general public. Next slide, please. So this is the recommendation part. So, so we developed a checklist for public action, both for national government and subnational governments. For national government can play a key role in creating enabling environments for cities and regions. This includes 3 components. First one is develop common policy tools and framework. For example, France or Finland is introducing a new regulatory framework on life cycle carbon assessment of buildings. The second point is enhance multi-level coordination. So for example, Netherlands is promoting Dutch climate agreement and worked with more than 100 parties to create this agreement. Third point is provide guidance and support to cities and regions. For example, labor shortage is the severe problem at the local scale. So Natural Resource Canada collaborate with training organizations to provide online training for energy advisors and energy efficiency sectors. Next slide, please. So we also have a checklist for public action for subnational governments. And this is composed of 3 components: plan, lead, engage. And plan involves common vision, regulation, monitoring, and evaluation. And lead involves public building and procurement, pilot project, and innovate business models. And engage include awareness raising, technical and financial support, and capacity building. And I will explain some of the examples in the next page. Next slide, please. So for the planning, it is important to provide common vision for all the key stakeholders, broad key stakeholders. So for example, British Columbia is developed a very ambitious zero energy step code. But in the process, they collaborate with the business sector to provide a long-term roadmap for strengthening the regulation so that the industries can prepare for that strict regulations. Similarly, San Francisco has introduced energy benchmarking ordinances where large building owners needs to report energy consumptions, and the cities collect data and provide as a database for the building owners to compare their own buildings with similar buildings so that they can think about how to reduce their energy consumption. So this is a good example for existing buildings. And the second point is lead, and there are a lot of innovative business models, including this Energy Strong program and Knopf Energy Solution program. And the local governments can promote these type of new innovative business models in public buildings and provide the outcomes for the private investors and private building owners to invest in energy efficiency. And it is very important to provide the evidences so that private buildings and investors can invest more in this policy field. The final one is engage, and this is one of the key strengths of cities and regions, engaging all the kind of local stakeholders. And one of them is SMEs, small and medium-sized firms. And for example, Emilia-Romagna region is providing energy diagnosis service for small and medium-sized enterprises, while City of Toronto is providing very low interest loans for households. And many households are using this city program, city funding, to renovate their homes. So this report includes these type of examples and provide checklists for both national and subnational governments. So thank you very much for your listening, and I'm happy to hear the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Atsuhito, for giving us this quick overview of this report, which contains, of course, much more substance and many more examples. And I see that already the opening remarks and the presentation have sparked, a number of questions. Please continue to use the Q&A function, not the chat, but the Q&A function to ask any questions or comments to our speakers. So because we are slightly behind schedule and we would like to make sure we have time to hear from our panelists, I will turn straight away to our three speakers in the panel discussion. So we are really excited to have three different perspectives. We have Mr. Gaspard Demure from the European Commission, Mr. Andries Griffroy, who has a double cap, but who is also from the European Committee of the Regions and the Flemish Parliament in Belgium. And we have Ms. Nora Steurer from the United Nations Environment Programme and also the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. So we will hear from each of them in just a few minutes, basically 3-4 minutes each, if that's okay with you. So I will ask first Gaspard Demure from the European Commission. And of course, we are in a context today where cities are really at the forefront of fighting, the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we said at the beginning, many recovery strategies today include a component on energy efficiency and renovation. So could you please tell us from your perspective in the European Commission, what the role of those cities and regions can be in really scaling up this much needed decarbonization of buildings, as we just heard. Yes, Bah.
Thanks a lot, and many thanks for giving us the possibility to speak today. It's a very timely moment for energy efficiency, of course. I'll focus on your question and would say that I see two main points where cities and regions can scale up renovation and energy efficiency. The first one is, of course, to channel financing on the ground and to use the money that is available at national and European level really for speeding up the process of renovation at local level. The second point is technical assistance, because many citizens that do not really understand, how to use the schemes that are available. They do not know them. So it's really information and technical assistance. These 2 points are really crucial. What are we doing at EU level to increase the potential on these 2 points for regions and cities to act? First of all, we've put a lot of money available for boosting the process of renovation. That we have these recovery plans. This is really unprecedented amount of money, of funding. We have nearly 50 billion euros available through the recovery plans for energy efficiency in buildings. And we are also at the same time, developing the operational programs for the regional funds at EU level, trying to have the same logic, in the different strand of actions. What we are also doing is a very close cooperation with the Committee of the Region. And I'm very pleased to see Mr. Griffroy there today. We have developed a joint action plan with the Committee of the Region, really to have a joint action and a joint planning for the action. I would say that, you know, in a nutshell, that's what I can say at this level. We will not manage, you know, the renovation wave that we launched in 2020 at European level without regions and cities. We think really into energy community, district projects for renewables, for district heating, for joint financing. So we have the long-term vision at European level with the renovation wave. We have the long-term innovation strategies. We have the recovery plans, but everything that we've put, you know, in place is nothing if we do not work with cities and regions. So that's what I can say at this stage.
Thank you so much. It's very clear, I think, that there is money on the table. There is also assistance offered, but as we could see in Atsuhito's presentation, there are still, you know, a number of challenges in order to absorb this funding and to implement those projects on the ground. So perhaps we can hear also from Andries Griffroy, as we said, member of the European Committee of the Regions and also member of the Flemish Parliament in Belgium. So you've been working, of course, on energy, climate, innovation in the Flemish Parliament and also in the European Committee of the Regions. And listening to the presentation from Atsuhito on the key role, of course, of cities and regions, but also some of the silos or bottlenecks that they are encountering, both in terms of financing or other types of institutional or capacity barriers. Can you tell us briefly what your own experience is, and are there maybe, you know, one or two key challenges for implementation on the ground that you see as critical to be addressed? Andries?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And of course, I agree with the previous speaker that we are working together as Committee of the Regions, and also with the European Commission. We see now that, for example, the war in Ukraine makes clear that we are too dependent from everything, sources coming from outside of Europe. So we have to bring that down. So the only way to do that is to invest more in renewable, but also, and I think at the first place, to invest more in renovation, consuming less. That has to be the first principle. But I'd also like to add another dimension. The dimension of, is funding enough? Because you see that sometimes, for example, we foresee now in Flanders about 600 million a year to renovate buildings with a lot of rules, with a lot of possibilities, with 0% lending, etc., etc., etc. But you see that people are not doing it really. And I think that's because cities and regions are not involved enough in the whole procedure. And for them, it's more like a top-down business. And then they have the reaction, a controversial reaction that they say, okay, no, why I have to do it because of a rule? They want to do it because prices are maybe high. And then I come to the key element. For me, the key element of success has to be in the future, the multi-level governance with the well-functioning cooperation with all the different levels of government. I think this is very important because this includes also that subnational governments like cities and regions who face, in fact, the biggest part of the climate change impact. And at the same time, these same subnational governments are also a large part of the solution. And so we have to not only work from top down by funding to say, okay, we have 50 billion, etc., but this bottom-up approach is needed. And so that's one part. The subnational government, such as regions, towns, rural areas, has to be a place in this decarbonization of buildings debate. Another very important issue is that I think when we have to go to legislation or to policies or frameworks or guidelines, etc., that we have to check for me, there are 5 key principles where you have to check it. And the first one is the subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is that the proposed measure has to be acceptable or acceptable when they cannot be implemented at a lower level. It's very important that we take into account the territorial impact of the proposed measures and take into account diversity of our territories. Because each region, each city has its own problems, has its own issues. Second principle is the bottom up, like I discussed just before, that we need is multi-level governance. And then the other ones are more like efficiency. I mean with that is that we know that resources are scarce and that raw materials are not endless available. So we have to make focus point on this efficiency. The cost has also to be efficient. The fourth one is smart. We have to be very intelligent about our legislation and policies, etc., so that we can use the maximum of our available technology. And the last one, very important also, is inclusive. Everyone has to be within, because you cannot do something which is in favor for a particular target group, and it has to be accessible for everyone. And it is highing up prices of energy, but also from materials, for example, isolation materials going up, etc., etc. I'm not sure that everyone is in, and this has also to be very important. So to conclude, I can say, for me, there are 2 very important issues. First of all, the multi-level governance, and secondly, when you discuss about new legislation and new policies, etc., we needed to take account about these 5 key principles. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being so concise, but really straight to the point. Just as we heard before, you know, there is a number of issues that everyone has mentioned, such as financing, and that are provoking, you know, a few questions in the Q&A. Because we will probably not have time to go through a second round of questions, I would like to invite our panelists to answer the questions directly in the Q&A, if you can, while we move to the third and final speaker in the panel discussion, Ms. Nora Stoira from the United Nations Environment Programme and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. So we were talking just now, actually, from the previous intervention about how it is important to engage all different stakeholders in this multi-level governance approach to the decarbonization of buildings in cities and regions, and also this bottom-up dynamics. And you were telling us actually earlier, you know, that one of the specificities of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction is precisely this multi-stakeholder approach, where you have, you know, a wide range of actors coming from the national and subnational governments, the business sector, the civil society, etc. So Noah, I was wondering if you could tell us briefly, you know, how those different stakeholders can really work together to tackle some of the challenges and also exploit the opportunities to decarbonize buildings. Noah.
Thank you so much for inviting me, for having me here today. It's my pleasure and my honor. And let me just take a brief moment to also congratulate you on this great report and the really, really interesting findings. I think it's quite heartening to see so much action, so much ambition happening on the local level, and especially with a view also to the COP26 and COP27, right? We do need to move from commitments, from plans to action, and it's very clear that cities have such a vital role there. Let me also say that we are really, really keen also here to seek how we can collaborate. We, of course, in the Global ABC have the annual Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction, which takes a little bit more a view of the national level, and also linked to the previous speaker, Mr. Griffroy, I completely agree that the key word here is multi-level governance. We need to do much, much better there to really address the huge potential of the sector. So to your question of how can all the stakeholders work together, let me just again go a little bit to the national level here, because it is true, and several speakers have alluded to that we do need the national level to set conducive frameworks. And I think the findings of your report point to this fact that often, not always, but often cities go above and beyond what is given by the national level in terms of ambition levels. And maybe this needs to change, not to the detriment of cities, but maybe it needs to be more that the national level really sets a more ambitious, a clearer framework. And if we just look at some of the facts and figures, and I won't go into detail of many, but let me just talk about codes for a second. And as our name indicates, at the global ABC, we have a global view. So in terms of countries, we go beyond the OECD countries. So please indulge me when I give facts and figures in that sense. For codes, we're looking at 22% of countries who currently have mandatory building energy codes, 22%. And if we look at some regions, so let's just take a look at Africa for a second, it's 9%. So there's a huge gap in action. So I think this is the first point to really enable all stakeholders coming together, that we have some key regulations, some pillars in place that really help push the market, that enable front runners and that push the laggards. If we look at NDCs, the picture is more heartening, nationally determined contributions. It's 146 countries who have mentioned buildings in their NDCs. Building energy efficiency is the second most mentioned measure in NDCs overall after renewable energy. That is heartening, that is good. That is not just a reaction to the current crisis in Ukraine, that is predating that. So I think there is a big recognition there, but there needs to be more. It needs to be much more ambitious. And I think that is my second point. We need common targets, common and ambitious targets, and they need to be set in things like the NDCs, but also, for instance, under the, and indulge me, this is a long word, the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action, under the UNFCCC, where all the non-parties, everyone that's not a country, so that includes cities, but also the private sector, come together. And we've set there a target, co-led by the Global ABC, but by many others, that building emissions need to halve by 2030, and we need full decarbonization along the life cycle by 2050. So second point, we need this common, ambitious and clear target that everybody adheres to and that everybody can reference, whether it's a city or whether that's a private sector or whether it's a country. And the third point is, and again, my previous speaker alluded to it, which is great, is that we need this whole life carbon approach. Energy and energy efficiency is very important. There's no question about that, especially now, but we need to go beyond that. We need to go beyond operations. We need to think about materials, because when we look at embodied carbon, actually half of that, or most of that, is set at the moment that the building is being designed. Now, of course, for buildings that will still be standing in 2050, as is the case for many, for over 70% of buildings in the European region, the question is more the refurbishment. But still, we need to address buildings. We need to address materials. We cannot achieve whole life carbon beyond that. And again, cities have a huge role there when it comes to public procurement, for instance, and that was referenced earlier, when it comes to design decisions and so on and so on. And I think, to be able to achieve that, we have to have fora which are dedicated to this collaborative spirit, to bringing all stakeholders together. And we have those fora, but we don't have them everywhere. And they don't necessarily have, let's say, the power, the leverage that they need to have. I mean, we have green building councils in many countries that bring together the different actors. We have so-called national alliances for buildings and climate. There's one in Morocco that is really great, with the aim of really bringing the national, the local and the private sector together and jointly working towards collaboration. And I think it's really great also what the distinguished Japanese speaker alluded to earlier. Part of that is really also this interministerial collaboration. Japan, I think if I heard correctly, 3 ministries work together. That is fantastic, because one of the challenges for buildings is that in many countries, there's multiple ministries, 3, 4, 5, 6, involved in buildings, because it's such a systemic issue. So we need to really have all the ministries working together. Chile is a great example. I think there they have made a building decarbonization plan with 7 ministries involved. So that is really fantastic. If I come back to the question of LCA, life cycle analysis of materials and whole life carbon, we have country frontrunners there as well, right? Some were mentioned, the Netherlands, France. Let me also mention Denmark. There, I think, for coming back to the building codes question, they will have life cycle analysis included in their building code, I think, as of 2023, which is really a frontrunner. So yeah, let me stop there. I hope that provided a little bit of an insight of how we see all stakeholders coming together. And thank you once again. This was really insightful. Back over to you.
Thank you so much, Nora, for this global view and really putting the finger, on some of the key topics that again and again come back in this discussion. And that unfortunately, I'm really sad that we don't have time to go a bit more in depth into the Q&A, because there were, issues raised about, of course, the whole life cycle approach that you just mentioned, the financing and the subsidies, and how much goes to which level of government, what are the incentives to, engage also the inhabitants in some cases, and also the question of data and the metrics that is required to monitor and implement and continue to advance those efforts. This is a very rich field, of course, but because we are already over time, I will just give the final word to Atsuhito Oshima, the lead author of the report, for really the final concluding remark, and then we will have to close this webinar. Atsuhito.
Thank you so much. It was a great discussions, I think, and we've learned a lot from all of you, and especially the importance of multi-level governance. A lot of stakeholders are, making their efforts, like from the supranational level, EU level renovation wave, which creates a huge momentum and provide huge funding, and also city and regional level, taking ambitious measures. So, and then of course, as Nora mentioned, national level is, producing a lot of interesting examples. But I think, as rightly mentioned, multi-level coordination, multi-level governance would be very important point. And this is my last day, but the program doesn't end this, and then my successor will come, and we will continue this program, and we will continue to provide international peer learning opportunities, and we would like to collaborate with you more. So we hope that this webinar could be the basis for the next step, and we'll especially proceed on this multi-level governance perspective, including detailed policy examples and indicators. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Atsuhito, and huge thanks to all our speakers and panelists, and also to our magic OECD team behind the scenes who worked tirelessly to make this webinar happen. For all of you out there, again, the recording of this webinar will be made available on our website over the next few days. And as you just heard, this is not the end. It's literally the end of this webinar and the end of the beginning, if you would like, but our OECD program on the decarbonization of buildings in cities and regions is continuing, and particularly we will engage in other country dialogues and country-specific reviews as well. So if you are interested, please do reach out to us, and it will be our pleasure to work closely with you. Thank you very, very much again, and have a very nice rest of the day or evening wherever you are. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next occasion. Thank you so much and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.